Just a couple days ago, we recognized the 1 year anniversary of an event that brought to national attention and awareness a problem that's been just below the surface in our country for decades, really, the problem of racial injustice. From that time a year ago, a lot of campus ministries, perhaps for the first time, began to be aware of and start working toward addressing that topic that has been under-discussed up to this point. For some of us, there may have been missteps and pitfalls in that journey. For some of us, there were great strides toward more open conversation. But for all of us, there's still a long way to go. So today, Trevor Petty, campus minister at Impact Colorado, that's University of Northern Colorado, is going to come and help us to continue to move forward in the ways that we inform ourselves, the way that we address the topic of racial justice in our ministries moving forward. So please welcome Trevor Petty as we start with our first session here today. And I'm going to pull him up so that he is spotlighted here as well. And I'm going to go away and we will give the mic and the floor to Trevor.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today. It's good to see you. It's like a shot of caffeine in the arm. I speak with you today not as an expert or instructor, but as a companion navigating this challenging season. Racial justice certainly isn't a light topic, so I appreciate your presence and pray that God would be speaking during this time. What a year it's been. Feels more like 5 years since last summer. As I look back, it actually caught me by surprise to realize that George Floyd's murder and trial actually stand as bookends to the school year. It's stunning to see how fast the conversation around racism moved. Just last summer, protests and demonstrations swept across the country, in some place riots. The Black Lives Matter movement, which had already begun, grew quickly and increased in volume. There was a growing list of hashtag names gaining recognition across the country. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Eric Garner, to name a few. We were flooded with terms and ideas like implicit bias, systemic racism, white privilege, critical race theory, maybe for the first time. There were clashes around Confederate flags and monuments, backlashes, mantras redirecting concern to other groups. Politicians often doing little to help the dialogue until ideas became cemented in political rhetoric and presidential campaigns, making issues even more complicated to talk about. And that was only the first 6 months of the year. Throw in a flurry of voting legislation, athletes and professional leagues weighing in, and that about gets us to the murder trial. I remember cycling through a wild range of emotions, reactions, reflection, concern and confusion, shock and anger, surprise at things said and done, and at times by who was behind the saying and doing, around family, friends, pastors. At times it was as if a rug was being pulled out, or opening the hood of a car to discover problems you hadn't recognized. But this year also turned into a year of learning, relearning, connecting the dots, making out some constellations that have always been there, but I just hadn't recognized. A year of remembering conversations, experiences, and people. I remember person after person in my life, friends, family, community, and church members, whose racial experience I'd never even considered as they navigated life in the predominantly white communities that I was a part of. I remember a conversation with my nephew, who was close to my age and lived with us through high school. We're catching up while he was in college, and he was venting about getting pulled over again. A little confused by what he meant, I asked if he was speeding. He was, but it's just not the same, he said in the last conversation we'd have about race for over a decade. An experience that likely revealed to him that I didn't understand and wasn't someone he could open up to about these things. I remember a student expressing excitement about an affinity group, a Black Bible study on campus, and getting a little confused. If anything, at that time, I was probably skeptical at best and contentious at worst about the value of such groups. I remember a training on campus that informed us we shouldn't ask students where they were from. I openly expressed to the school administrators my confusion about this because, quote, I ask everyone that question, and in my mind didn't see how it could be connected to racism. Less than a year later, I'd meet a student with a name I'd never heard before and immediately ask, where are you from? Realizing for the first time that I was communicating to this student that they were somehow alien or different through a question they were probably asked constantly. I remember it as time and time again, the churches I've been a part of have referred to and acknowledged and incorporated holidays in their programming and sermons, but have never once acknowledged MLK Day. I remember meeting a student at an involvement fair, and in a short convo, it came up that they'd come to the school for a scholarship. What sport? I asked, and could see the student visibly shut down as she said academic before walking away. I remember shuffling through that conversation mentally for days, all sorts of, well, I'd never, or I didn't mean, or that wasn't my intent, when the effect of what I'd said was clear, that I had communicated to a student that she was less intelligent, capable, and perpetuated an experience while representing a ministry. In many ways, my experience this year was a shattering of my self-concept as someone who is, quote, not racist. The unthinkable evil that I could or would never embody. I discovered that a lot of my anger this year was actually with myself. Things that I've done and said or failed to recognize right in front of me, harm I've done to people, places, and the body of Christ. I was Adam naked in the garden, looking for someone to blame. As I used careful deflections and distractions, justifications about my real intentions, or frustrations with what I was or wasn't taught, or how something was poorly presented or communicated to me. To borrow an analogy, racism is like a glitter bomb, and we're covered in it. As we try to remove it, we find it in strange places, and it's incredibly difficult to clean up. It can be as subtle as associations we made as we drove by certain neighborhoods growing up and noticed people looking or talking a certain way, while our brains grab convenient explanations and stereotypes, justifications that we've heard or depictions we've seen. We may not even be aware of it until suddenly we are participating with a wrecking ball as it swings back and forth through our society. Maybe you can relate. Tired, angry, defensive, overwhelmed. Wherever you are in this experience, I plead with you to not let your hearts be hardened. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. It is the fertile soils of honesty and humility that God can bring about transformation and healing. But we have to be willing to look at, listen to, and learn from our mistakes. So with that said, we'd like to break you into groups now of threes with an opportunity to be open and honest with each other. And the question I'd like to leave you with is simply, how are you doing with all of this?
Okay, so like you said, we're going to break into groups of three at CMR there in McCormick's Creek. You guys will divide up into your own groups, and we will come back here. So just kind of keep an eye on the screen for when we're back. But otherwise, we are going to send you all to those groups now. Okay, I think we have everybody coming back here. I don't yet see, okay, I see the big CMR table. I'm going to go ahead and get Trevor back up here and let him continue for us.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that time was valuable. Hopefully a good start to things. If it's something you'd like more of, please don't be shy about reaching out to somebody and talking more. I know this year ministries have done all sorts of stuff to engage the topic of racism. Some examples, I know there have been pulpit swaps, trainings, studies, small groups, discussion groups, prayer vigils. Maybe you've been able to participate in some activities locally or with churches locally. It was actually in a book discussion that I got to meet Donnie Holliday and a fellow campus minister, and appreciated some of his own efforts this year as his ministry has been navigating this topic. And so I actually asked if he'd be willing to share with us today. And so I'm excited to introduce to you all the wonderful Donnie Holliday. So Donnie, just to get things going here, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and your context of ministry?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Trevor. And actually, before I do that, Trevor, I just want to thank you, man, because your honesty and that opening part, just telling the thing that's like, when we're honest, that gives all of us a better chance to be honest and open up. So thank you for leading the way in that. But yeah, as Trevor said, my name is Donnie Holliday. I am lead pastor of Christian Campus Fellowship, or CCF, at UGA, University of Georgia, down in Athens, Georgia. I've been at CCF since 2013. UGA, flagship university of the state of Georgia, 35-ish thousand students. And I mean, I can't not say that we're a Power 5 SEC school, because when you're in the land of football, you just have to say that pretty much every time. Yeah, that's a little about us. We our campus house, we are blessed to have a campus house. It's an old 1910 house that is actually on the same street as many of the sororities and fraternities at UGA. We typically meet there. COVID forced us to use a nearby church just because they have a bigger space to meet in. But numbers wise, we ran about 80 this year at our weekly worship gathering. Pre-COVID, we were, about 120 or so. And just as far as for the purposes of this conversation, UGA is about 30% students of color in their enrollment. CCF this past year, we were a little below that. We were about 25% of our students are students of color. 4 full-time staff members, and yeah, it's a little bit of who we are, and
awesome.
Just excited to get to share. And I want to say something again. It's kind of something Trevor said. This is not a do it this way. This is a here's some things we tried. Here are some things I screwed up, and I want to help you avoid those screw ups. And we're all just trying to figure out the best way we could, navigate some crazy stuff. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks, Donnie. And why don't you start, just tell us a little bit, like, what does this journey look like for you all this year?
Yeah. For me personally, and I guess for CCF kind of indirectly, this journey to this year really started back 2017, 2018, that school year. That year, our theme was taking us through some of Paul's letters, and one of my really good friends, who's actually a minister at a Christian church up in Williamsburg, Virginia, Fred Ligon. He's one of the senior ministers of Williamsburg Christian Church. He and I were talking in September of that year about the theme and all of that. And he said, well, do you have any ideas about specific chapters you're going to talk about? And I said, when we get to Galatians 2, I'm going to talk about how we should handle conflict. When Paul, just talked to Peter about how the way he was behaving around Gentiles differed when Jews were around, was not good. And my friend Fred basically, I want to say challenged, but I think he was low key daring me. He said, you could talk about how to handle conflict, or you could talk about what the conflict was. And I was like, did you just dare me to talk about racism? And he was like, yeah, I did. because that's the way Fred is. He's just very blunt and direct with that. And I was just like, okay, so that was in September. We weren't going to get to Galatians 2 until January. So I had plenty of time. I dove into reading books by authors of color, read a lot. I reached out to, we had very few students of color at CCF then, but reached out to them and just tried to talk and get to know folks a little bit better. That talk back in January of 2018 went fine. There really wasn't a big reaction one way or the other. I mean, when you do a talk where you say racism is bad, I mean, nobody's going to come right out and be like, no, you're wrong. So, I mean, no big deal with that. But the events of this past summer of 2020, obviously impacted me, led me to really look back into those things I had spent a lot of time looking into. Really felt called to reach out to our students of color, and just felt like we needed another Thursday night talk. Thursday night is our weekly worship time, and felt like we needed another talk for that. So I did that this past October. But I went a little bit further, and instead of just saying racism, I specifically addressed white supremacy. I specifically spoke to the evils, not just of racism, but of white supremacy. Now, one thing that I did with that talk is I shared that talk, my notes, my manuscript that I worked from, with the rest of our staff. And I manuscripted part of it. Usually, I just work from the outline. I just kind of like to, okay, here's what I want to talk about, but we just kind of go. But when it's something that I'm particularly passionate about, I have learned that I need to manuscript it. Otherwise, it can come off as a rant, and I don't want that. So I manuscripted the second part of that talk, and I had the rest of staff read it. Everybody was good with it. We were in agreement that, okay, this is the thing we're going to do. We're going to say white supremacy is a bad thing. That should not be, that big of a deal. And for the most part, it wasn't, but there was some pushback. We did have some students that were caught off guard. We did have some students that we haven't seen since, which obviously was not my goal, and I do not say that proudly by any stretch. I mean, that is heartbreaking, when students leave. The pushback was honestly, it was frustrating. And it was also surprising, because in my mind, to say that white supremacy is bad is not a novel concept. And I'm certainly not saying any of these students left are, raging white supremacists. They're not. They're not at all. I'm certainly not saying that. But it was. I think it caught them by surprise. And so one thing, and we'll talk more about this later, one thing I wish I had done differently is maybe done a little preview of that message Thursday afternoon at some point. Just maybe dropped a short little video on our Instagram to be like, hey, just a heads up, we're talking about a pretty hot button issue this evening, because I think it did catch some of our white students off guard. I had an intern ask me, so do you regret doing the talk? And I don't, because of how many of our students of color reached out to me afterwards. These are students who have been in church their whole life, and several of our Black students, who are some of them are our student leaders, said it was the first time in their 20 or so years of life they had ever heard a white minister address white supremacy at all. And so they were tremendously appreciative of the talk. And if it hadn't been for that, it would have been very hard. It was hard anyway. But that was hearing their appreciation, hearing their sincerity was honestly what got me through how difficult November was, the beginning of November was, in all honesty. So that was definitely the big thing for the year, but it was certainly not the only thing. So
yeah, so things didn't stop, and in some ways that, I mean, I think helped kind of build some of those connections and some of those conversations with your students and student leaders. So where did things go from there?
One of the things we talk about at CCF is, regardless of whatever it is, we always say we want to continue the conversation. We never want to just do a talk on Thursday and be done. So what we did was we had via Zoom and some kind of hybrid stuff. We had some discussion groups in the weeks following that, just to ask students, okay, what did y'all think? What questions do you have? Things like that. And those discussion groups went so. If I'm just really honest, I mean, we had, we had some students asking some really good questions. But as one of our students of color put it, it's like, the people that really need to be in these Zoom discussions aren't in them. So students wanted to know, well, what else are we going to do? It can't just be this. So I had a thought of, let's get together the Friday, but this takes us to spring semester, the Friday before the Dr. King holiday. I said, let's just get together. Let's watch Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. It's 17 minutes long, but a lot. I know I'd never seen the whole thing in college. I was definitely well into my 20s before I ever watched the whole thing. I said, so let's just get together and let's talk about that. And I talked to a few of our leaders who are students of color, and I said, hey, would y'all help me lead these discussions? And we did that, and they went better than the Zoom discussions, but still not that great. They weren't contentious. And when I say they didn't go well, I don't mean they were contentious and they were negative. I just mean it was just kind of not very well attended, just kind of, not a ton of, okay, what can we do? Just more of, okay, here's where we are. And so coming out of those discussions, those student leaders who are young men and women of color asked me, we want to do something else. We don't want it to just be this. We feel like there needs to be something that we do that spurs action. And that was kind of where those students, they weren't content with just, okay, let's talk about this, but with the purpose of getting some actionable steps, some things that we could do. And so that then, I guess, evolved into these discussions that we called awareness and action. And these awareness and action things came from those student leaders wanted to do something actionable, but also from a survey I had done just because I was curious. I had reached out to some of our students of color and some of our alumni of color and just asked them, hey, what was it like? What's it like being a student of color coming into CCF? Do you feel welcome? Do you feel like you can be you? And about this time that these student leaders came back to me after the "I Have a Dream" sessions and were like, hey, that was good, but let's do something actionable. A few of the alums got back to me and said, hey, whatever happened about that survey? Like, did you ever do anything with that? And which I heard, I heard two groups of people being like, are we going to do anything with it? So the awareness and action stemmed from the awareness of, let's make our current students aware of what past and present students of color have said it's like to come into CCF as a student of color. And then let's come up with some actionable things that we can do to make that better. And so taking what the student leaders were saying and what those alumni were saying, I took all of that and then kind of went back to staff. I was like, hey, here's the things that I'm hearing. What if we do this action awareness thing? But what if we just have these 4 student leaders, 3 young Black students and 1 Latina student? I was like, what if we just give it to them? And they don't co-lead it with me, they lead it. And obviously, I'll meet with them beforehand and kind of see what they're thinking, but let it be their thing. And y'all, when we did that, when we made it their thing and we advertised that it was going to be their thing, and I kept my mic on mute most of the time, unless one of them asked me a specific question. Those were the most productive without question. I mean, with that, we got actionable things that our students realized they can work on. It was enlightening for our white students to realize that a student of color who's been here for a year, even a year and a half or 2 years, still may not feel the comfiness, is how one of our students of color put it. She's like, yeah, it's great. I know y'all love me, but it doesn't feel like home because I can't be 100% me. And to make all of us, and even me, aware of that, and then to formulate some action steps. Okay, what are some things we can do? Was huge. And for me, the biggest learning moment this whole year has been talking to our students of color, because the things that I think are great ideas, more than once this year, they've been like, nah, Donnie, you can't do that. That's just, they're like, we love you, great heart, terrible idea. And so that has been hugely helpful for me. Also to build a relationship with students, and for them to be able to be that honest with me, just be like, no. I think Trevor, we got time for me to give a good example of that, you think? Okay.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of that was, again, with these same students. It was after the killing of Dante Wright. We were having our staff meeting on Thursday, and one of our interns said, hey, should we do something? Moment of silence, prayer, should we do something about that? And one of our graduate assistants, who is Latino, he said, Donnie, I think you should reach out to those Black students that you have had good conversation with, who have led these awareness action things, and ask them what they think. And I was like, yeah, it's because to me it was a no-brainer. Yeah, we should say something. I'll do the talk. And so I reached out to them, just sent a group text, and got about an hour and a half later, got a text back from one of them saying, can we just hop on Zoom? Because if everybody else is like me, they've texted 4 times and deleted it because they can't figure out exactly what to say. And we got on the Zoom, and pretty much all of them were like, yeah, I wanted to say something, but I couldn't figure out what to say. And so I just asked them. I didn't tell them what I was thinking. I was just like, y'all, what do we do? What should we do? And the consensus among them, and granted, this is 4 students, and I don't expect them to speak for, every Black student at the University of Georgia, but these are students that I have a good relationship with. And their consensus was, one, saying something probably won't change anything for most of our folks, because they're not going to hear it anyway. And y'all, to hear that just hurt. I mean, to hear a 21-year-old young lady be like, I mean, we can say something, but it's probably not going to change anything. But then she followed that up. That their second point of their consensus was, we still need to say something. We can't not say something, but it shouldn't just be words. It needs to be something that is about us as a family. It needs to be hey, if you want to talk about this, if you need prayer, if you want somebody to pray for you, with you, whatever, staff, interns, our senior leaders, they would love to do that. And then the third thing they were in unanimous agreement was, I couldn't be the one to say it. They were just, that was like, they were so appreciative and so loving, like, Donnie, we really appreciate that you're trying and you want to do this, but you can't be the one to do it. And one of them that I was on that Zoom was a young Black man who was going to be leading worship that night anyway. And so it just seemed obvious that we just give him basically the mic to just, hey, and he was one of our senior leaders also. So he was able to just be like, okay, y'all, we know things are crazy. There's more violence going on, all that. We're here as a family. If you need to talk, if you want somebody to pray for you. And him doing it was so much better than if I had. But if I had just gone up there at the beginning of my talk and been like, okay, I'm going to do this real quick, I don't think anybody would have heard it. and it wouldn't have come across, no matter how I tried to put it, I don't think it would have come across as sincerely as when this young man did it, because he just did a really good job with it. So as I look back on this year, the things that were really good were the things that had a ton of not just staff input, but student input, and specifically input from our students of color and some of our. We had 2 graduate assistants and 1 intern this year that are also people of color, and so hearing from them, being like, "Hey, I'm thinking this. What do you think?" and just listening to them. That's been the thing that I'm taking from this year, is the importance of building relationships, so that when you have an idea, a student feels comfortable being like, "Donnie, I love you, but that's just a terrible idea," or "That's a good idea, but you can't be the one who says it."
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Donnie, for sharing. I know this is going to be kind of uncomfortable. And as he said, like, when I invited Donnie, I was like, this is not for you to talk about what everyone should do. We understand that people's contexts are very different. That is not the idea here. What I've appreciated, just as I've talked with Donnie along the way, was that he was wrestling through things. And I mean, some things to highlight was willing to talk with people and ask questions. Students that he had a healthy relationship. He wasn't just walking up to random people like, what if we did this? But he responded to what students and alumni said. I thought that survey was just awesome. Like, to get that feedback back. And I appreciated his honesty too, about how, like, it wasn't on his radar to do something with it. And everyone's like, what'd you do? But that he was willing, again, to meet with people and talk through that. And finally, I guess I just want to highlight too that it's still a mess. Like, I don't know if it's possible to do things, to talk with people, and it just to everyone be happy, everyone to feel great about, like. And I just want to highlight that this it's complicated. People are all over the board. They don't know how to talk about things. And while there's certainly wisdom into like how we navigate that, I think it is just kind of healthy to realize, like, there are going to be messes. There are going to be people who are mad about something, and just trying to make sure that we take those steps to handle that well, to give space for things to be voiced that need to be voiced, to empower our students to voice their own experiences. And so, so thanks again, Donnie. If you want to hear any more, if you connect, your context is similar, or talk more about an idea or something that they did, like that survey or something, I'm going to put him on the spot, but say, please reach out to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to keep having conversations. And one thing I do want to say real quick is that there are times I wish I had been more gentle. Like, if you were to ask me, what's the one thing you would have changed? I don't think I would have changed anything I said in that talk back in October. I think I would have changed my tone in some places. I'm fine making people feel uncomfortable, because the gospel makes people uncomfortable. But I think the tone I used at times made some people feel unwelcome. And I definitely don't want to do that. I wish I had been much more in that talk of, here are some things I'm learning, not how can people not see this? Because even though I think, how can people not see this? That doesn't help. So that's just the last little, man, if I could have done that differently, I would have been a little more gentle in the bigger, group, when it's not a back and forth. I'm a little more blunt one-on-one when it's just me and you talking. But when it had been bigger groups, I wish I'd been a little more gentle, because if you're gentle, then you have the opportunity for that conversation where you can be a little more direct. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Trevor. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for joining us. Where do we go from here? I think it's safe to assume that we're going to continue to see conversations in our society about reform in all sorts of areas, like policing and incarceration. I think we're going to continue to see political rhetoric complicating these conversations. Along the way, the terminology is likely to continue to change. Language is less fixed than we like to think and evolves along the lines of practicality, and we should expect this to continue. Among many, there's an increasing shift in focus from diversity as a solution toward the need to better identify and dismantle white supremacy. There's also a growing conversation about other racial identities and experiences that are often overlooked, which we do well to learn from. As we continue down this road, we need to be aware of the space we occupy in this conversation in our society. As evangelicals, we're part of a religious movement whose response to these issues has historically often been that of silence and resistance, perpetuating problems as a result. Because of this, we approach this conversation at somewhat of a deficit. And there's a lot that we can learn from secular voices as they identify problems and social dynamics, even if we don't agree with the certain approaches or philosophies. For some simple advice for the coming year, I would just say keep going. Don't get bogged down by the messy dialogue or the illusion that this is just a momentary phase that will pass or has magically been resolved. Be willing to evaluate your own efforts. What have you learned? What went well? What went poorly? What's worth continuing or beginning? Learn from your mistakes and keep learning. What are some areas of this conversation that you don't understand or find most difficult? Is there history you need to brush up on? Some terminology to dig into? What are some activities or ideas that you can implement with your own staff or students? And finally, take others with you. As you learn or try things, invite others to join. Family, parents, neighbors, small groups, even your pastors. Share what you're wrestling with, inviting them into the conversation or activity. I'm finding that a lot of people want to talk about things and have no idea who to talk to or how. People need spaces to process, and that includes you. This year, I've become increasingly convinced that the civil rights movement wasn't simply confronting our government, but also white American Christianity, a confrontation that was poorly received. I've discovered that calls for racial justice have often been central to the social justice movement. Something has gone desperately wrong when Christianity has nothing to offer the wounds of our world. And I found that one of our greatest assets, our theology, is often hindered by some significant blind spots unique to the evangelical movement. I've come to see some of these themes, specific themes, more clearly as they keep interrupting and complicating conversations again and again. And so as we wrap up here, I'd like to take a few moments to highlight these themes now. And I don't do this as some kind of accusation of what you are doing or thinking, but just to help articulate some of the hurdles I see consistently. The first theme is that of individualism. Our culture is hyper-individualistic. I am hyper-individualistic, if you know me, which influences our thinking and our theology. We think of sin as a personal matter addressed through often private confession as part of a personal and private relationship with God. We often think of forgiveness on individual terms, person to person, or ultimately a matter of my individual standing before God. And this line of thinking allows us to dislocate from or remain naive to the places, histories, struggles, or broader contexts we find ourselves in. It interrupts conversations about community problems or the sins of organizations and institutions, as we suddenly find ourselves at a loss of words when it comes to the harmful structures or collective responsibility. And instead, we place blame for complex social dynamics and conditions solely upon an individual who is always assumed completely capable of overcoming any obstacle entirely on their own. I'd invite you to consider how your ministry communicates the gospel and whether it relates primarily to individuals or to a broader community and collective identity. The second theme I see is what I call disembodiment. I've heard it referred to in other ways. We participate in an often disembodied Christianity that prioritizes things like spiritual health and spiritual growth and spiritual habits and spiritual truths. Salvation conversations often focus on the cross as accomplishing a spiritual outcome, marginalizing things like significance of the incarnation, or forgetting the resurrection outside of a simplified happy ending in a spiritual paradise. The end of the biblical story is often communicated as a harvesting of spirits from bodies as God discards his creation. We also often speak about forgiveness in spiritualized terms relating to our spiritual standing before God, dislocating sin and forgiveness from places, people, relationships, or communities that have been harmed. It creates a tendency to turn forgiveness into a godly forgetfulness that is removed almost entirely from a material world and often leaves out repentance and reconciliation altogether. There's no reconciliation without repentance. A changing of course that often includes things like repair or restitution between people and communities. The theme of disembodiment renders people speechless when it comes to conversation about actual damages, how to restore people, heal relationships, communities, and institutions harmed by sin. I'd invite you to consider the way you speak about sin and salvation. Does it involve God's creation or simply spirits? How can you articulate forgiveness in a way more holistic that includes repentance and reconciliation while pointing to Christ? The last thing I want to highlight is a borrowed term. It's called triumphalism. We live in a country that has, by and large, won its wars, and so has been able to write its own story as a victor, celebrating its triumphs, successes, expansion, growth, greatness, and superiority. It's brought a nationalism that has too often merged with Christianity. The United States is not the kingdom of God, and that is actually good news. But this merging has led to an inability to acknowledge mistakes, express sorrow, or navigate failures, both individually and corporately. It has influenced our own vernacular in worship and has left us often without the ability to publicly mourn or process suffering and injustice together. We need a fuller worship that includes both mourning and celebration as a part of the Christian experience and can combine both praise and lament. I'd invite you to consider what worship looks like in your own context. How does your ministry provide spaces to process suffering and sorrow as a part of the Christian life? In our ministries, we play a significant role in helping people think through and discuss their ideas and experiences. We have a lot of influence on how people think about things, and the way that we communicate about these issues matters. As a campus minister, I continue to be excited by the vision of a next generation shaping churches that is not naive to these issues, but encountering Jesus in the middle of it all, living bold lives full of compassion, conviction, and empathy, able to engage our broken world with a fuller gospel, one including both spiritual and social dynamics of a God actively redeeming his creation, with hope in the holiness and wholeness of a God who hears, and with lives shaped by his rightness and righteousness. I get excited thinking about a people able to prophetically speak God's blessing to the poor and persecuted, to peacemakers and the pure in heart, to the meek, the merciful, and mourning, to those longing for justice. Please pray with me. Oh God, thank you for this time and spaces like this where we can reflect and process and talk together about challenges in our lives and our society and our ministries. God, I pray that in this time you would be bringing things to the surface. Ideas that we need to hold on to, or if there's something you've been prodding us with, God, may we grab that and remember. And may it shape our course, our conversation in the days, weeks, and even years to come. Thank you again, God, for being with us, for challenging us, for transforming us. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, as we wrap up, we've actually got a couple things to pass along to you. I probably just interrupted Matthew. I put together, well, I guess I would refer to it as like a little bit of a survey of some other resources. It's just different books and films. You can find that. I think he's putting it in the chat or on the website as well. This is not intended as like me trying to tell you to read and view all of this. That's not it at all. I would simply invite you to just poke around a little bit and reflect, think, ask God if there's an area you need to explore more. There's also just a list of some terms that I'm hearing more, and I think will probably be coming up more that might be worth exploring. Also, if you're interested just in some more conversations, Matthew's put together a little survey where you can express that and just some ideas or ways that this could continue. And so if something like that interests you, please express that. But otherwise, thanks again. It's been an honor to speak with you all. Like I said, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that we're having these conversations. So thanks.
All right. Like Trevor said in the chat, I have put a couple links. So you can click and go directly to that reading list. You can click and go directly to that survey and fill that out. And we will get that information and be able to further those conversations. Those are also on the website. Again, you can go there, and if you click on the events and go to CMR, where it talks about the online portion, those two links are also there. So you can go at any time. If you didn't get them from this chat, or if I end up closing this and you didn't get a chance to click on that, you can go to the website, click on those. And it is a really good reading list, a really good resource list, viewing list. And it is a survey that can help us begin to put some of you guys together to continue this conversation. So do make use of those. Now, we are going to take a small break. The way today worked out, we have another speaker coming at noon Central Time, or 1 Eastern, or 11 Mountain, or 10 Pacific, wherever you are. Come back at that time, because we're going to have an author named Lance Witt who wrote a book. He's actually written several books, but he wrote one called Replenish, talking about the healthy soul of a pastor. And so we're going to have him come and share with us right at noon Central. And so we want to give you an opportunity to go get some lunch. And I know we just had one session, but go ahead, get some food, get outside if it's nice. I don't even know what it's like where you're at, but go maybe outside, stretch your legs a little bit, and then be sure to be back here a little bit before that time, so that when he starts right about noon, you don't miss anything. And we'll continue on. We have a couple more sessions after lunch, and I thank you all for being here with us today. So go spend some time, and I'll see you back here in about an hour.